Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Danielle Sebastian to the show. Best-selling author and speaker, Danielle shares her inspiring story of resilience and hope, detailing her journey as a wife overcoming the complex challenges of being the partner of someone who survived childhood trauma. Danielle, welcome to the show. So excited to chat with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited.
So just while our listeners can get to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about your backstory and what sort of led you to the work that you're doing today.
Absolutely. I would love to. So really, my story started 12 years ago when I married my dream guy on a beach in Kauai. And it was our second marriages, and he had a daughter. So we joined, Brinley into the family. And it was so exciting and so wonderful. And it was really what I'd always been looking for. However, it wasn't too long after we were married that I started to notice some behaviors that didn't make much sense to me. And it was causing a lot of conflict in the relationship. So things started with just an obsessive need to control his environment. And so little things around the house had to be a certain way. And there was no flexibility in it being done a different way. And then I started to notice some significant withdrawal with any sort of conflict. And this withdrawal is different than just needing a break from a fight. It was, I'm locking myself in the basement for a few days and not talking to anyone. And that was something that was causing a lot of issues in the relationship, as well as just pulling away. So as soon as I felt like we would make some progress, then there would be significant pulling away. And it was finally got to the point where I had tried everything. I had tried all the relationship books, listening to all the relationship podcasts. I tried the love languages. I tried date nights, using I statements, all the communication techniques, and nothing worked. I was just hitting my head against a brick wall. And I'd finally got to the point where I'd had enough. And it was only at this point that my husband was able to reveal for the first time to anyone a terrible history of childhood abuse at the hands of the church. And this, I realized, was that piece of the puzzle that I was missing. And I just knew instinctively that was probably the thing that was keeping us from making progress, and that if we could really delve into it and get deeper into that we might be able to fix what was going on in our relationship.
Wow, what an incredible story. And so, I want to just recognize how challenging that must have been for you as well as for him, right? And recognize that sometimes it does sort of take us to reach that rock bottom point in our lives to be able to dig out of it and come out the other side. And so, obviously I hear that you were very persistent and pursuing all avenues to really, make things work. And I definitely know that you're not alone when it comes to learning of childhood trauma at a later point in your relationship, right? And I think that's part of one of the reasons that I do this show is to help normalize these conversations, because I think there's a lot of shame involved and people feel like they have to suppress and hide certain parts of who they are and their experiences. And then it does really impact them in their lives without a lot of time them even realizing it. So I'm assuming that's what inspired you to write your book. So Danielle authored Resilient Wives, a guide for wives supporting their husband through childhood trauma recovery. But tell us a little bit about, your journey in writing the story and what you hope readers will take away from the book.
Absolutely. So it wasn't long into the trauma recovery process that I realized that I was very naive to what this would look like. I really thought that once we found that puzzle piece, that it would be a few months of counseling, in a year we'd be through it and everything would be fine. But what I found is that that is not the case. That trauma recovery is a very extensive process and that it really never really ends. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. And so what we were able to end up doing was being able to develop tools and techniques to manage the triggers and the emotions that were happening in our relationship in a healthier way in order to take us all the way to the end. So that's what I learned. But I also learned that there are a very surprising lack of resources for spouses in this situation. I literally could not find anything except for some articles online. There were no books to guide me through this. And so it was really through trial and error. And so about 8 years after my husband revealed this secret of us working, me researching tirelessly on this, I approached him and I said, I think that we made it through this for a reason. And I think it's our story needs to be told. And I think that we can help other people through this. And because of the work that my husband had done, he was okay with that.
Wow.
It took a little while, right? It wasn't like immediately like, oh yeah, let's tell our story.
I can imagine.
You
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah.
But after a while, we both realized that that's what we would like to do with where we've been.
I love that. And I know that you're helping many others who are in those similar situations. I love that you were able to identify there is this need, there's a gap, there's a void, and you took the initiative to help fill it, right? And I'm sure it did take some coaxing because it's not easy to tell our stories, but that is part of the post-traumatic growth when you can see on the other side of it how your story can benefit others and how you can help others. And that can be incredibly powerful.
And the thing about trauma and especially, sexual abuse is that it's a secret. It's not something that's talked about, but what really needs to happen is you need to talk about it because only with dealing with it will it release your power, its power over you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is scary and it is hard, even with those you love, right? And sometimes it's even harder with the ones you love.
Yes. And I think that a lot of trauma survivors feel like they're protecting their family and spouses by not telling them. But if I could tell survivors anything, it would be that we can handle the truth.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's such a great sentiment. And I think you're right. I think you made another really important point is healing is not linear. It's not easy. It's not overnight. It is a lifelong journey, right? And it is something that, doesn't just go away, and it does take, some heavy lifting. It does take a lot of introspection. It does involve you having to be vulnerable, and work through the pain in order to heal. But to your point, you have to start somewhere in order to release the grip that it has over you and reclaim your life. But it is something that is ongoing. So in your experience, Danielle, I'd love to know, how does having a traumatic childhood affect us and our relationships when we're adults?
Absolutely. So how I describe it for spouses, because I really just was like, I need somebody to dumb this down for me. I mean, I can read all about the trauma brain and, the mechanisms in the brain that were affected, but I just kind of want to know what it feels like and what I can do about it. So this is how I describe it. The children who experience severe trauma, they develop coping mechanisms in order to survive that childhood. that end up not being very helpful in adult relationships. So the coping mechanisms were absolutely critical for them, but they do need to be tweaked in adult relationships in order for it to be a healthier and sustainable relationship.
Yeah, that's very well said. So at one point, they were adaptive behaviors that helped us to get through a difficult situation, and we hold on to them. And then later on, they become maladaptive, right? They're no longer helpful, but we are so attached to them, they've just become sort of ingrained.
And it's instinctual.
It's
Absolutely. It's nothing that the conscious brain is saying, I need to do this. It just happens. That's how they respond. That's the behaviors that they default to.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of what that might look like?
Absolutely. So the first one, and I kind of alluded to some of these in my story, was this need for control.
Yeah.
So survivors, they were so out of control of their childhood. They had no idea when things were going to occur to them, who was going to be doing it. In some cases, it was very chaotic and they had absolutely no control of what was going on in their lives. So they will seek control in other ways in order to cope with that feeling of not being in control.
Mhm.
And the control that we need to understand from a spousal behavior, because it's really easy to default to, oh, you're just a controlling jerk, right?
Sure.
It's all about me. You're trying to
Sure.
control me. But what it was really happening, they're trying to feel safe.
Yeah.
And it is that coping mechanism where they are doing it for themselves and not necessarily to harm anyone around them.
Mhm.
So that's a really good example. The other thing is the pulling away. So obviously trust is going to
Mhm.
be very difficult for
Yeah.
a trauma survivor. The people who they trusted in their lives hurt them deeply. And so that's going to be very difficult for them. So the trust issues. And then another thing that's detrimental in relationships is when there's any sort of conflict. So the trauma survivor is constantly hyper alert to signs of danger. And they are going to sense danger even when it's not there. So any sort of, things that would be very normal to say in a relationship, like, hey, can you help out with the dishes tonight? For example, the survivor can feel like you are personally attacking them and their character and
Yeah.
who they are as a husband.
Yeah.
And they will respond in ways that don't make sense, either by lashing out or, being very defensive. Or in my case, there was a lot of withdrawal, dissociation from
Mhm.
the event.
Sure.
So those are very common responses that we as spouses need to understand. This is a trauma response. It's not you.
Mhm. Yeah. And so if you are a woman finding yourself in that tough spot of dealing with your partner's childhood trauma triggers or, something as you sort of alluded to that maybe you feel has sort of a deeper connection, where do you even start to get a handle on things?
The starting place is really starting to understand the trauma survivor's brain. So what I was just alluding to so that you can start separating yourself from those coping behaviors and coping responses, separate yourself from it and realize that it's really just their default responses. So that's the first step, is just really getting deep into what is triggering your partner and how you're responding to it and what you're telling yourself
Yeah.
that may not be the case. So that's definitely the first step in the process. And then there is also a lot of pressure for spouses, because usually the trauma event is not something that the husband wants to share widely, to really keep it to yourself and not get the support that you need. And what I want to tell women in this situation is that this is not something that you can slap a band-aid on
Mhm.
and it's going to be fixed. This takes work and it takes a team. It takes a team. So you will need support, and you cannot be everything to your partner who has been through something like this.
Yeah. It's great advice because, I think as high achieving women, we want to be able to help and fix, right?
You do. It's
The
your
people that we
instinct.
love.
And
Yeah.
then you start to feel bad about yourself. You're like, why can't I figure this
Yeah.
out?
Yeah.
It's not your fault. It's very complicated.
Yeah. There's, like you said, there's a lot of layers and it does require professional and external support. So it's a great point. When couples start to feel like, you're more on opposing teams, you use the example of dishes, which I love and I feel like is so relatable. Can you take out the garbage? Can you do the dishes? Right. Then it turns into something else. And I love what you said about kind of separating out the behaviors from, we tend to take those as a personal attack, and sometimes they're not. Often they're not. So when we feel like we're on those opposing teams, instead of being in it together, how can we turn things around to start building healthier habits?
Yeah, so I have an entire framework that's dedicated to calming that conflict. And man, I wish that somebody would have given me these techniques when I was,
Sure.
back in the midst of it. But really, it doesn't seem very intuitive, but the very first step actually is to not engage. So we as women want to fix it. So when our
Mhm.
husband feels upset, gets upset about something, you instinctively start to be like, well, what can I do to fix it? Okay, you don't want to do the dishes. That's fine. I can't believe I asked that. That was crazy of me, and I will do it. Don't worry about it. But then that actually fuels things.
Mhm.
And then you essentially have taken the blame, and then the responses get stronger. And so anybody who's been in this situation, you know what I'm talking about. That the actual trying to fix it makes it worse.
Mhm.
And so the first step that I tell wives is to not engage, which is very tough. So if you get the response of, I can't believe you're asking me that do you not know what kind of day I've had, those kind of things, I highly recommend that you just not engage it and be like, I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I don't think it's about the dishes. And so let's just take a break and we'll come back to it later.
So disengage, which for many of us is going to be very counterintuitive.
It is. It is very counterintuitive. And the wives that I work with are like, I don't think that's going to work. And they're very surprised when it does, because it puts the anger where it belongs, which is that, somebody terrible did something to them and you're feeling this response, but it's not you. It's
Yeah.
not you.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. It's great advice. And, earlier you talked about the privacy aspect of the situation, and I know that can be really challenging and understandably so. You know, when there's a big push to keep the story, and in your case, your husband's story under wraps, how do you find the support and the help that you need that respects the privacy? How do you balance the privacy, and ensure you get the support you need while still there's an important message to share? How do you balance that?
Yeah, this was something that I wished I would have done completely different. So if people can learn from me, that would be great. I ended up going to friends and family because I had to. And then, my husband would find out that I had reached out to them, and then there would be some backlash
Sure,
for that. So
sure.
that is not what I recommend. What I recommend, and it seems tough, but it's to have that conversation with your husband and just letting them know that you can't do this by yourself, that you're a woman and you need to talk about it with someone, and not necessarily talk about the details, but be able to reach out to people and let them know that you're struggling and you could really, use some help or use some laughter or need a walk with somebody. And so I recommend having that conversation to set the stage for, I'm going to need some help outside of this relationship, and who would we both feel safe with being that person.
Mm.
Because there's usually one person in your friend or family group that your husband will trust, and there's some who they're like, don't tell that person because I know they'll tell everybody else in the world, for example. And so it's just really having that conversation. And in some cases, it's not a family or friend. They'd rather you see a counselor where
Sure.
it is truly safe. So just being open to different options, but not letting it go. Right. So this is kind of setting boundaries about, I need this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's hard for you, but how can we make this work and make it safe for both of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I find that, in the work that I do and working with clients, there's, often there's the couples piece of the interaction or communication or whatever that breakdown is. But then there's also the individual components that is so important, right? So you can do the work together, but if you're not doing the work on yourself simultaneously, it's not going to be effective, right? So there's sort of also a balance of working together, but also doing your own work, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I had to use different techniques when I was responding to things than I ever had learned to do in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So even, in your situation, seeking care and help for yourself, I know as women, that we often feel selfish for doing things for ourselves. How did you sort of overcome that barrier, or did you have that challenge?
Yes. And I think, again, as you mentioned, women want to fix it and they want to do it all themselves. And there's this pressure, to keep it a secret and all these things.
Yeah.
And what I ended up learning the hard way, basically hitting, rock bottom, was that I needed to take care of myself as well. Because when I wasn't healthy, when I wasn't strong, no matter my best intentions in trying these new communication techniques, I was more reactive.
Mm-hmm.
I was at my wit's end, making things worse by not taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be a week vacation, right? To a spa getaway.
Yeah.
What I learned is that I needed to do, 3 or 4 things every single day, things that restored me, that made me stronger. So it doesn't have to be this huge, take, like I said, take the vacation or have a spa day. It's the little things that you do every single day that can keep you healthier.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. And obviously, seeing you on the other side of this, for other women who may be experiencing a similar challenge, what would you say to them in terms of, are these relationships that involve childhood trauma, are they salvageable, right? Is it possible to break through and break out of survivor mode and really begin to thrive again?
It is possible. And it's all about taking baby steps, making little changes that end up having big results. And the thing about trauma recovery that I want spouses to know is that it's very up and down. Really great, great moments, then followed by the next, maybe even the next day or the next hour, huge lows. And then it's easy to get discouraged. But what is really happening through this trauma recovery process and using these tools and techniques and communicating different is it's a ups and downs, but the ultimate trajectory is going up.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the key component, but it's really persistence and patience. And for example, those communication techniques that I was talking about, it's not like you can do it once. You're going to do it again and again and again and again until finally things start to get better and those conflicts lessen and the withdrawal is only a couple hours instead of 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this progress, small steps with the ultimate trajectory being up.
I love that. And I think it's important to recognize, because so often we do have a concept in our head of that trajectory going in a straight line up. And it's not, right? It is a very rigid and ragged sort of chart if you were to graph it. And it's important to recognize, just because you're having a bad day or a bad moment doesn't mean you're not making progress on the other side.
No, I 100% thought it was going to be an upward trajectory.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I was, thoroughly surprised when it
Yeah. Sure.
wasn't. And so if I can tell people what to expect,
Sure.
I think that it makes it easier.
Absolutely. It's an important myth to dispel.
Mhm.
And, also, like you said, I think it requires a lot of patience and consistency.
Consistency is so important because you may feel it may work one time, right? And then the next time you're like, oh, that didn't work very good. Well, try it again.
Yeah.
Be patient with it because, again, it is about being consistent with the responses in order to keep the blame off you. It really does feel very blaming towards the spouse. So putting the anger where it belongs is so
Mhm.
important.
Absolutely. So you're not absorbing that and taking it
Yeah.
on. And it is, I think the consistency over time is going to be super important because you are talking about shifting long-standing behaviors. You're talking about changing ingrained beliefs and habits that have been there for years, right?
40 years in some cases.
Mhm.
The average age for men to disclose sexual abuse in their past is 52 years
Wow.
old. So that's a long time for those adaptive mechanisms to be at
Yeah.
play. But it can be done. It absolutely can change.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense, right? And good for you for recognizing it and sticking with it and working through it. Because I think for a lot of us who don't truly understand it, or maybe, the truth hasn't come out, it's very easy to just throw your hands up and say, I'm not doing this. Right.
It is. And that's always the elephant in the room when I
Yeah.
work with wives. And so
Sure.
I have an entire part of my program that's called Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Hmm.
Because I do think it's important to understand, that you also deserve to have the relationship that you always dreamed of.
Hmm.
And in some cases, there may be progress made, but it may not quite be enough. And so you need to start really thinking about what do you need to get to that would be something that you would be happy with for the rest of your
Hmm.
life, and then continue to work towards those things.
Incredible. I love that. Danielle, on this show, we talk about success and redefining success. I would love to know from your perspective and, through your experiences, how do you define success for yourself? What does that look like today? And maybe how has that evolved for you over time?
Oh my. So my career is I'm a pharmacist. So I spent all 20, I think I've been a pharmacist for 22 years. So
Wow.
I've been working up the pharmacist career ladder, and now I'm questioning that because I have this new passion and
Yeah.
mission. So
Purpose.
success has changed significantly
Sure.
for me. And I mean, I know I made a huge difference in my pharmacy career, but I am making a total about face to have a different path. And it's just a calling. It was something that I had no idea would be my situation, but I am 100% committed to helping others with this story. So my idea of success has changed.
Yeah. And that's so powerful because the universe came knocking and you responded, right? You
Yeah.
you listened and you responded and recognized, wow, I have a greater purpose. I have a greater calling and there's more work to do here.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly powerful and just so inspirational and beautiful. And I think it's really hard for those of us who have been in a career for a long time, right? Working up the ladder as women, striving for something and then shifting, taking a totally different direction, pivoting. I think you and I share that experience. It could be a real challenge and you really have to sort of reinvent yourself in a lot of ways.
Oh, I'm researching things where I used to research medications.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, how do you tell your story? How do you do social media,
Yeah.
for example? It's a whole different set of skill sets. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Danielle, you've shared a ton of great advice for our listeners. Is there anything else you want to share that you want our listeners to consider doing differently or changing after listening to today's episode?
Well, I love this quote that says, what got you here won't get you there. And I think when we're talking anything about childhood trauma, I think that really just sums it up. That you need to get creative, think outside the box, do what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's all about identifying the behaviors and the things that you're doing either for yourself or in your relationship. How can you adapt it knowing that this is causing issues in your relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I really want people to be open to, that even though scheduling date nights, for example, is just it's like the deal, right? Every single relationship advice says you should schedule date nights, put it in the calendar. That didn't work for us.
Mm-hmm.
What worked better for us is that it would have to be a good night, for example, where my husband came home and he'd had a good day and I'd had a good day. It just didn't work. So be open to other techniques, and what got you here isn't necessarily what will get you there.
Such great advice. And Danielle, where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
The best place is my website. So www.daniellesebastian.com, just like it sounds. I have free resources on there. I have a blog, and I also offer anyone who's interested to get on a call with me and we can chat and I can learn more about your story.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insights, your expertise, and your story. Thank you to you and your husband,
I know.
Danielle. Really.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me get my story out.
Of course. And of course, you can visit my website, gialacqua.com. Reach out on Instagram at gialacqua. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care. That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.